Come on in the room. Come on in the room. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Today is May 27th, 2020. Another blessed day. Another incredible day. You already know we have a great show for you today. We've all been waiting for this conversation. So come on in the room. Tag somebody. Go ahead and as you come in the room, like this video so others can see it on the algorithm. Share this video because we have to ask some questions of our chief. Tag people who need to hear this conversation. You've been having this conversation with people in and around the city of Houston, in and around Harris County, in and around Fort Bend County, in and around this country. We've been talking about officer involved shootings. And so today we will get some answers. So come on in the room. Like this video right now. If this is your first time, like this video right now. If you're a regular viewer, thank you so much. Hit the heart button. You know how we do. And but everybody, share the video, tag somebody who needs to hear this conversation because we want to get the information to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Damien Jones podcast where we talk about news, politics, and life topics in a fun and unadulterated way. Thank you so much. Come on in the room. We got a lot to talk about today. Just want to give folks a few minutes to kind of come on in as well, because we will be talking with Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. Let me just say this while we have a moment and folks are still coming to the room. Like, share, tag, get everybody in the room. I feel it is a great honor to have a platform that we have on this show, and even my Facebook platform. It's an honor to have such a platform to share information. And so I feel a great honor, but I also feel a great responsibility to be responsible with that platform as well, to share fair and balanced information as well. And so I always try to do that. But as we have these conversations, as we share our passionate opinions and perspectives on things, because we all look at life from a different prism, and we all have to respect that. No matter if you're a Democrat, no matter if you're Republican, no matter you're independent, we all have different views, and those views need to be respected. And so remember that we can disagree without being disrespectfully disagreeable and demeaningly disagreeable. We can disagree with someone who has the same passion, but just sees an idea differently. And so I encourage, and let me go past encouraging. I am kindly asking that when you engage on my platforms, in the comments below, and on posts that I may share, just be respectful in how you engage with others. I think the dialogue and the back and forth is beautiful. That is what makes democracy. That is the sausage making of making good government, as we share our ideas in a passionate way. And I'm so excited because everybody is sharing their ideas on this platform, and I really appreciate it. But you don't have to agree with me. I'm okay with that. But I just want to give everybody an opportunity to share, and we always will be respectful. So that starts with me. And so I will always be respectful to folks' ideas. And if you are disrespectful to me, I'll engage with you in a respectful way. And if it gets out of hand, I'll block you. But just wanted to share that really quick. So come on in the room. Happy Wednesday, Damien Jones podcast. For those who are just in the room, like, share this video, tag others who may need to hear this as well. Let me also say, are you registered to vote? Make sure that you are registered to vote. No excuses. I don't care who you vote for, but you need to vote. You need to vote down ballot. All politics is local, so make sure we're voting the entire ballot. If you feel there's some places where you may need to skip, then do so. But I encourage you to cast a vote. So make sure you are registered to vote in your local area or what have you. Just wanted to make sure we say that. Also, let's continue to be responsible with our health and wear a mask as we go out in society, as things begin to reopen and we still need to move around about our daily lives. Continue to wear a mask even when you're having fun. Avoid large gatherings, beaches, parties, those type. It's okay to say no. If you say no now, it will probably more than likely extend your life and spend more time with your loved ones. So please continue to wear a mask as well. But we're going to get some questions answered today from Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. I want to thank each and every one of you for your support, but particularly let me thank our good friends at sorryiamsick.com who jumped on to be a sponsor for today's broadcast, to bring this broadcast to you. So we are thankful to our friends at sorryiamsick.com who has some great apparel. Check it out. You will definitely enjoy it. So thank you so much. Check out that website and support that small business as well. So thank you all for that. But you know why we're here. Every day in America, police officers shoot 3 people per day. Every day in America, police officers shoot 3 people per day. And unfortunately, the large majority of those people who are fatally killed by police officers are Black and brown men and women. And naturally, there's some outrage. When you talk about George Floyd, when you talk about Breonna Taylor, when you talk about Eric Garner, when you talk about a Tamir Rice or a Walter Scott, and we can go on and on and on. Black folks, brown folks shot down. A very contentious relationship between law enforcement. We're scared. We're looking for answers. We're fed up. And so we sat down with Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo and had a great conversation with him. And he answered some really important questions. In this interview, he mentioned why there is a 50% increase in murders in the city of Houston. He talked about bail reform and what he feels judges can do differently to keep our streets safer. He clearly addresses the long string of officer-involved shootings within the last few weeks. And he also talked about the impact that his father's love had on his matriculation into being a law enforcement officer. I know you have questions, so let's get some answers. From Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. Damien Jones podcast. Thank you all for joining us once again. I am sitting with Houston Police Department Chief Art Acevedo. Chief Acevedo, thank you for joining us on the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Dan. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to have a conversation and look forward to a dialogue.
Good. Yeah, I mean, people have been clamoring to kind of have this conversation, to hear from you. There's been much conversation around Harris County and around the country as well as it relates to community policing, relational policing, the relationship between law enforcement and underserved communities of color, poor persons. And there's always a constant uprising or a frustration amongst folks. And so I'm glad that you can come and sit down with us and kind of face the music and kind of just be transparent and answer some questions. But folks, I'll tell you, as we go into this conversation, thank you for joining us. Leave comments down below. I know Chief will read these comments and he likes to be interactive as well. We want to know what you think. If you agree with something he says, please hit the like button. If you disagree with something he says, let us know you disagree. But we want to be interactive, and that's how we make government better, by interacting and letting us know. But first and foremost, Chief, just want to check on you and your family. How are you and the family doing? How are you guys adjusting to COVID-19?
Well, it's just that it's an adjustment. I'm a Cuban American immigrant, and we're very hands on. We love people. I think communities of color generally we're a lot more in your face than other cultures, and it's really hard to keep a distance. It just runs contrary to everything growing up. We're huggers, kissers, and not shaking hands. It's just it's tough, but thank God everybody's healthy. Not just my wife and my children, but my extended family. My in-laws who live in Los Angeles, we've had them under house arrest for months now. We basically don't let them come out because they're in their 80s.
Good.
Yeah, and they cooperate, which is good. You don't have to have that fight.
Yeah. So let's talk. I want to talk a little bit. I did a little research on you, just because I always like to know about who the person is, and get beyond maybe the headlines and try to understand the why and who you are and how you get to this place, but not going too far into your personal life and background, because that's a whole nother show. But I learned that you were very, very close to your father. And I'm sure you're close to both of your parents, but you were close to your father. Kind of talk about the impact that your father had on you and how that led you into a life of law enforcement.
Well, our dad and my mom too, but our parents, my dad was really taught me that it's okay for a father to love their children, to love on their children, I used to ask for his blessing every night. I'd ask for the blessing, and he'd have to give me my blessing. And if he didn't, I'd stand there and he'd tease me and stuff, and sometimes he'd pretend like he didn't hear me. But he really taught us growing up that you got to fight for what you think is right. One, two, that never forget, having been born in communist Cuba, which is where I was born under the communist regime, that he always said, that don't forget that the worst day under the freedom that the United States brings to you and gives you is better than the best day in communist Cuba. So that was the mindset. And then he'd always say, hey, son, don't forget, man, if you're not afraid to lose, you can't. You've already won.
Right.
You came to this earth with nothing, just do your very best. And then he gave us a real sense of patriotism, which is really what led me to want to give back to the country that gave us the greatest gift of all, which is freedom. And that's what really he instilled in me and my brothers and sisters.
Yeah. But I also read that you considered going into being a lawyer, going to law school.
Yeah. I wanted to be one of three things growing up. Either West Point graduate. If you think about West Point, went there when I was 13 years old, the United States Military Academy, the original academy. My hair stood up because I love history. And you think about Ulysses S. Grant, and Patton and MacArthur, all these great leaders, Eisenhower, that graduated from that great institution. And but God has a plan for everybody, and people that don't like you, they'll always try to say, they're going to fire you, they get rid of you. They don't understand. My life's in God's hands. He's the only one that opens and closes doors for me. Ain't no man that's going to open and close the door. He's got the plan. And so, I had an opportunity to test with the SATs when I was in the basic training in Fort Dix. My DI called me and said, you have the highest ASVAB scores, which is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. Yeah. And he said, the colonel wants you to take the SATs to see if we can get you into West Point. I got all excited. Then I remember, well, wait a minute. I said, drill sergeant, I'm not a citizen. Get the F out of me. And so plan A didn't work out. Then I came on. I was hard. They thought I had anemia thalassemia, which I didn't, which is kind of like sickle cell anemia. Is predominantly impacts the African American community. Sickle cell anemia is African American community. Anemia thalassemia is the Mediterranean, people from the Mediterranean, and I have the trait. So, but this Dr. Arthur Patswami kicks me out of the Army in basic. Well, I'm a hardhead, so then I applied and interviewed for an Army ROTC scholarship at the Cal Poly Pomona. Won, but my citizenship didn't come through. So God said, that's not what I want you to do. Then I went to law school for a semester, and that towards the end of the second semester, my heart kept saying, does California really need another lawyer? There was I think 150,000 lawyers.
Right.
And the answer was no, but they need police officers. And so that was one of those three things I wanted to be, either a DA, West Point graduate, or a police officer. And became a police officer in 1986, went to East Los Angeles. I've never looked back. Love the profession. Love community policing, relational policing, because I don't talk about community policing anymore. It's all about relationships.
Okay.
And it's just, it's a lot of fun. I love it.
A man with a gun on Scott Street that you all heard, again, our community calling us because there's a guy with a gun on Scott Street. A man with a knife at the fiesta going after our community. We're responding to our community. But let me just say this. We've had nearly a 50% increase in murders in this city this year. That's not cops, 50% increase. 100 and something people have been murdered in our city in some very violent crimes. And for those that want to focus just on officer-involved shootings, I say you need to start focusing on what's going on in our city. Over 100 people have been murdered in our city. I don't remember the exact number as of today. Do we have a number? So that's 125 murders with this little old lady. And so where's the outrage for that? Where's the outrage when we are chasing the same crooks out here? Where's the outrage? Where's the outrage when our cops are putting their lives on the line, arresting the same person time and again who's got a violent history? So don't come and talk to me about officer-involved shootings when nobody's putting the mic in the hands of the judges that keep letting these crooks out time and again. Where's the outrage? Why is it it's the police chief and the police department that's talking about these judges? And you know what they want me to do? They want me to go away. Well, I got news for them. I'm not going away. And they're not going to shut me up. And we will start putting out when a guy on 8 felony bonds is out carjacking people. Where's the outrage? Where? I'll tell you where. Directed at the wrong things. We've got to pay attention.
So let's cut to the chase, Chief. We've seen the viral video. I posted it on my platform, I think a week ago or something like that. And when I saw it, I knew it would provoke thought. I knew it would provoke conversation. I appreciated your passion in the video, but many others have expressed that they appreciate your passion, but they also disagree with you. And I think people are polarizing on both sides of the issue. In that video, you talk a little bit about taking the criticism from the community as it relates to the 5 fatal officer-involved shootings in the past month. You also mentioned your officers having to pick up the same people over and over as a byproduct of judges offering minimal to no bond to these same folks, in your view. But then you also talk about a 50% increase in crime in our city this particular year. Now, a lot of the critique for those comments say that there's no nexus between those 3 items. How did he mix? They say you are deflecting from the issue of officer-involved shootings to then turn it around and blame judges, and then also deflect by talking about the crime increase. Yeah. Chief, can you make it plain and describe to us and make the connection between how those 3 issues interconnect?
Well, because none of us live on an island. We're interconnected. We're interdependent. And when you think about what's going on in our city every single day, first of all, let's go to that Walgreens. Okay. I saw a little 80-year-old woman. I saw my mother's face when I was on that.
And that's when you made those comments at the Walgreens.
After that, poor little Mrs. Cook. Mm-hmm. Was stabbed by this guy who probably, mental illness is probably going to be part of his issues. But when you start getting violent, whether it's mental illness or drugs or just not a good person, we got to do something. We got to put. I was talking to Sheila Jackson Lee the other day. One of my congresswoman,
right?
And I said, Congresswoman, we've got to do something for two things. One, the mental illness, so we can address it before it spirals into violent behavior. And two, for those that are violent, well, if it's because of mental illness, don't put them in prison, but you got to put them somewhere, because otherwise we end up like we did with Mrs. Cook. And on top of that, what goes on in the city every day, our murders are up 50%. Sadly, the very vast majority of those murders are people of color. And just about all of them, it's either people of color or poor people, including poor white people. Because a lot of times we forget there's a lot of poor white people in this world, in this country, which is part of the anger in that community, that people don't talk about that segment of the population. And I think my frustration was, we have 5 officer-involved shootings. I've seen all the videos, and there's, I can tell you at least one that I'm very concerned about, that I've already expressed that publicly.
And which one is it?
That's Mr. Chavez, the man that was stabbing himself, and
the guy who was shot on his knees.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you have concerns about that. Okay.
I do have concerns, but the frustration is every day. I don't sleep at night. Troy Fenner, my executive assistant chief, who's born and raised right here in Houston, we don't sleep at night because we're worried about the deaths in our community. And I think my point was, look, let's acknowledge we've had 5 officer-involved shootings, and we will get through that process. We will be transparent as soon as everything's done, put it out. But does everybody realize that we have a 50% increase, not in just any crime, but in murder?
Murders.
We've got situations where when little kids are shot, some lady on that Facebook post the other day was all upset that, how dare you, I can't remember her name now. She's a lawyer, African-American lady. She's like, how dare you use these, the shooting of these children as political, prawns or something. I'm thinking to myself, wow, you're no different than the extreme right, when every time we have kids shot in schools or in theaters or in malls, they're always, it's too soon. No, it's not too soon. It's too late. We've got to do something about what's going on in our communities, and I think that's my frustration.
So as you talk about your frustration, but this 50% increase in crime, what do you attribute? Murder. I'm sorry, and murders. Yeah, murder. What do you attribute it to? Do you attribute it to folks being on lockdown and COVID-19 in close proximity? Do you attribute it to kind of some missteps in the bail reform system and allowing repeat offenders out? What do you attribute that increase in murders to?
Our homicides were already up before we'll call it the lockdown, but the stay-at-home orders, essential business workers order. But they've really they went from bad to worse during COVID. So we're attributing it to several factors. One, we've got over 500 murderers charged with murder in our county that are just waiting around for trials, and most of them are out in the streets. A lot of them are out on the streets. Two, people that have been arrested on violent crimes that are back out on the streets. And this is not just a Harris County issue. This is a nationwide issue where reform, what's smart reform? What have we gone too far? That's a conversation that's going on in New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., all over the country. It's not just here. The other piece is that it's harder to move dope when it's easier for the law enforcement to pick off loads and stuff, either at the border or on the highways. So a lot of it is drug-related dope rips where folks are shooting each other over the drug trafficking. And then the last piece that's the driver is domestic violence. We saw a beautiful young woman and a 7-month-old fetus murdered. I think it was, what's today, Friday? I think it was Wednesday. First thing in the morning, her ex-boyfriend goes in. She's 7 months pregnant, shoots her mother, shoots her sister. Thank God that they both are expected to survive. Shoots and kills her. And sadly, the 7-month fetus didn't survive. Then went to her current boyfriend's house, shot him. Thankfully, he's going to expected to survive. Then ultimately, when we tracked him down to, I think, Tomball, he shot himself, and sadly he committed suicide. But Domestic violence is the other piece that's really driven this, which I think part of that's also COVID. People are they're losing their jobs, pressures building, and we know that when there's economic strife, that's a challenge for families.
Yeah. So Damien Jones podcast, speaking with Houston Police Department Chief Art Acevedo, as we just kind of walk through a chat on public safety and how we can work better together as a community to make our streets safer and build trust. But he's also addressing some of the concerns of the community, officer-involved shootings, and so forth, and so on. Please continue to leave your comments below. Please continue to let us know whether you like the content or what the chief is saying as well. You mentioned Nicholas Chavez, but also Randy Lewis, fatally killed by Officer Nicholas Chavez. You mentioned that you have concerns about Adrian Medeiros. It's also a situation that people are outraged about.
Absolutely. Now I understand. I mean, think about Mr. Medeiros. Here's a guy that's a gospel singer, well known, a pillar of the community, and he ends up shot and killed in an altercation with a Houston police officer. Like I said, not only in my press conference, I also said it in an interview with the Chronicle the day before the press conference. We don't know what was going on here. I know some of the conversations because I reported it out to everyone from.
Yeah. What you saw the tape, but what went on there?
I mean, and again, my condolences. I got to extend them to his brother Audric, who's a firefighter in Cy-Fair. And really, as a matter of fact, his services are today up in Fort Worth. I don't know. I mean, it is. He passed a police car. Officer Ramos was driving on the North Freeway, and we have this on the in-car camera. Which is a DWI unit, passes him at 97, right by him. Usually, people don't pass a police car at 97 because we're kind of paying attention. You don't want to get a ticket, right? So that doesn't happen too often. That's your first clue that some potential DWI or something else, especially in the middle of the night. The officer pulls him over. Directs him off the freeway, goes into, thank God, to this parking lot where there's an ADT office there. Thank God.
There was some footage.
I mean, because
and this was what time was it? It was about 2 o'clock in the morning or something.
Middle of the night. And so officer makes the approach. Everything's going fine, and then as he's doing FSTs towards the end of the field sobriety test is how we assess you for. An individual for potential DWI. Mr. Medeiros starts bringing up, I think it's Ahmad out in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta. The jogger Ahmad, and then makes a comment like, "I don't like. I'm getting some crazy thoughts." And there was a shift there, and then the officer says, "Sir, that's Atlanta. I mean, this isn't you. We're two men here."
So he was expressing some of his concerns and fear,
yes,
as it relates to what just happened in Georgia with Ahmaud Arbery, as he spoke with your officer.
Yeah. Okay. And then the officer said, "Sir, I understand that, but that's there in Georgia. That's there in Atlanta. You and I are just two men here, just conducting business. You're going to be fine." Now, I'm just paraphrasing, right? So, and at one point he asked him, "What's your race?" to the officer. The officer was a light-skinned Hispanic. Excuse me. And so when everything was done, the officer had him turn around, put his hands behind his back, went to control his left arm, grabbed his handcuffs, and as the handcuffs came to make contact to take him into custody for suspicion of DWI, he spun, and for the next 2.5 minutes, there was a pretty violent confrontation.
There was a struggle, and it was just only those two gentlemen on the scene at that time, correct?
Right. And the reason I say thank God for ADT, and I always say God's a plan for everything. I mean, He answers our prayers when we don't realize He's answering our prayers, and He knows our needs as a society, as a department, as individuals before we even need them. Well, almost immediately, the body-worn camera, that goes here or here or here, gets knocked off in this fight. Now you can tell that it's on the ground. You can still see something. You can hear a little bit, but everything is captured from these two ADT cameras. The officer puts out the backup. I need, I'm resisting arrest. I'm going to fight. Roll me back up. They're fighting by the car, by the police car to the right front of the police car. Mr. Medeiros pulls away again, and the officer deploys his taser. But a lot of folks don't realize tasers have two prongs, and they have to have enough space in between so the energy can actually impact enough muscle,
right,
to be able to get you to go down. But
so there's a struggle, and your officer now looks to deploy his taser to neutralize the situation.
Yes, sir. To try to take him into custody, but the prongs were too close together, and it was not effective. They end up from the front of the police car. The police always behind you like this. They end up here in front of the police car. The officer, and they're fighting, they're struggling. The officer gets Mr. Medeiros onto his back. And if you look over the internet, I mean, when police officers are fighting, they get you on the ground. A lot of times they'll be seeing this. This officer actually just pins him down.
Okay.
And for a minute, he has him pinned, around a minute. And he gets on the radio, goes, "Hey, I have him pinned. I have the suspect pinned. I'm not going to handcuff him till people get here." But then Mr. Medeiros kind of calmed down. But I would say about 45 seconds into that 1 minute, you see his knees come up. I don't know if you wrestle, but when you start putting your knees come up and somebody's on top of you in a spear position, and before you know it, flips the officer off. His taser was on the ground, and he grabs the taser, and this is all on the ADT videos, very clear. And they're still struggling up close, and then he grabbed the taser twice, and he grabs the taser and he starts pointing to the officer. The officer disengages, and that's when he fired, striking Mr. Medeiros. Backup units get there, and they started CPR, and you will see our officers doing the CPR, and sadly he died. So we won't know what was going on, but I just thank God that I was able to talk to Audric, his brother.
So you've talked to the family? Yes,
and they came in. They got to see the videos. By the way, I did try to reach out before that press conference, but I couldn't get through to him. I had left him a voicemail to Audric, and then he put out that video, that Facebook and text and Twitter asking that everything be released, all the videos. And I think he even tagged Sean King, who's actually a friend of mine. We work together a lot of stuff. Sometimes we agree, and sometimes we agree to disagree, but I think we agree more often than not. So that tells me I'm kind of progressive. So after we spent 3 hours here in my office, in my conference room, and it was, what
did you all discuss?
I showed him all the videos as many times as he wanted to see them.
So the family has seen the video. You've been in contact with them. How did that meeting go? Was there tension? How did that meeting go, Chief?
Look, I will say this. I've been a police officer for 34 years. I've been in internal affairs. I'm not, people that work for me will tell you, the haters, this guy's just too tough on cops, right? Well, no, we're appropriate. You're either right or wrong, and right and wrong is very rarely is it fuzzy. When law enforcement, there's a line, there's this distinct line. And so I just told them, I said, look, I've seen everything. I don't know how you're going to react, but I don't want to give you false hope. I don't think that you're going to end up, unless we're missing something, with an indictment or something on the officers in the shooting. And I walked him through that, because I would rather that he be pleasantly surprised if he sees all those videos and says, "Oh, this guy's murdered my brother," or it was whatever, than to again give somebody hope that something's going to happen, and then they're again, just disappointed again.
Yeah.
So we went in there for 3 hours. The whole meeting was about 3 hours, and It's really between the family and the police chief. But I think that what was going on was humanity at its best.
Right.
A man,
Emotions.
Yes, I mean, that's his brother, man, and it broke my heart to and that's not the first time I've had to do that in my career. I did it for a father 2 years ago, and the father. This is before we could show the videos and keeping them without subjecting them to TPIA. It just changed, the Texas Public Information Act. And this father here in Houston, I was pretty new. Do you know ACLU Terry Burt,
I don't. I can't say that I do.
The director of the Texas ACLU. She called me. She says on a Thursday, "Hey, this shooting occurred. This gentleman was killed in an observable shooting." And I go to every shooting scene. If I'm available, I go, because I think I'd rather rely on my eyes than on a report, so I can see with my own eyes. And she said the father's convinced, the neighbors have him convinced that the police murdered his son. And I said, well, I was there. And I said, I saw video. She goes, is there any way you can show it to him? And I said, absolutely. I said, but tell him to please not go around telling everybody, because if he does, and then there's a public records request and he doesn't want it released, we have to release it. So he came in. That was powerful. I mean, we cried together, hugged together. And, that man never filed a complaint. He never filed a lawsuit. And so I'm so grateful that families can see videos
of what happened.
I think it used to anger me that people had to basically sue or wait till the
just to see the video.
Yes, and this
is to see what happened, right?
So that's been a huge.
So let me ask you this, Chief, and I'm glad you just kind of walked through that situation with Adrian Medeiros, and condolences to his family and all those who loved him. I'm glad you walked through that, kind of gave us a little transparency there. But what we heard from some of his final words were he was talking about Ahmaud Arbery, right, and what was happening in Georgia.
Yeah.
And I spoke with your cadet class about 2 weeks ago, and one of the things I shared with them is the history of the relationship between law enforcement and Black and brown persons. And what I told them was like, hey, when you pull over a Black or brown person, we are scared shitless. We could have all of our IDs, insurance, everything is in order, but because of the history of what has happened over the years, brutality, flat out terror, when you talk about slavery, when you talk about Jim Crow, when you talk about the story of Jose Campos Torres here in the city of Houston that they found in Buffalo Bayou, killed by officers, and they were given a probation for 1 year and a $1 fine. When you talk about what happened with Chad Holly here a few years ago, when you talk about what's happening with Officer Gerald Goins and what's being uncovered as it relates to that, there is a history of deep terror. When you talk about Ahmaud Arbery, there's a deep terror, there's a deep fear when we encounter the police. And then you add these 5 fatal shootings, Chief, can you understand the outrage and the frustration coming from the community as well? We've heard your outrage, but can you also understand their outrage as well as it relates to this relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. Because remember, what happens is we all look at things through the prisms of history or the prisms of our own view. But what happens, though, is that sometimes if we don't take a deep breath and pause and to wait till we get more information, we never get out of that cycle, right? And so what I always tell my police officers, we need to be as transparent as possible. We don't like on the Chavez case, we don't want to release the video because what happens if we get we don't like releasing videos, because what happens if we end up getting charges on somebody, and then there's a change of venue. We go from Harris County, this big melting pot, to some other county where maybe the police can do no wrong, no matter what it is. I think we take away our community's ability to pass judgment, and we don't ever want to take that. So that's one of the reasons we try not to release videos in most cases. But I do understand that outrage, especially because it's 5 in a very short period of time. But what I always tell people is we need to start looking taking the time to look at things through the prisms of what occurred. Like, it's like people that will go off on somebody because, I had a bad experience a year ago. Well, that was a year ago with somebody else. But we also, as police officers, have to understand that the history of policing, disproportionately bad policing, has impacted communities of color and poor communities, including poor white communities to a lesser extent, but there still has impacted them as well. So when you understand that in the front end, you have to approach your job in a way that you try to disarm people, try to get people to relax. And with Mr. Medeiros, with Audrey, the officer says, "Sir, I understand that, but that's in Atlanta. This is me and you right here. Have I been disrespectful?" And so it's something that if we don't study history and we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it over and over and over again. So yeah, I absolutely get that. Completely get it.
But I also think it's important, Chief, for your officers to also understand that history as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
As they approach situations, and that's relational policing, as you talk about. If we understand and know the history, I think we as officers will approach some situations a little differently. Would you agree there?
Absolutely. So it's interesting because I always tell, I'm all about relational policing, right? Which is came up with the acronym TREAT. It's transparency, respect, engagement, like we're doing here to build emotional capital. People, hey, man, you're Mr. Hollywood, always on TV. I believe that familiarity breeds trust. I mean, if you're going to see me and hear from me for the first time when we have 5 shootings in a little over a month, and who is this guy?
Right.
But because I'm out there in the community, working patrol, making sure that we take care of business, we build that emotional capital. Then we have to engage emotional capital, hold people accountable. We have to hold each other accountable. Sometimes we have to have tough conversations. Sometimes we have to agree to disagree, but we have to have that accountability. And when we do all this stuff, we build trust. But here's the deal, though. Americans think that our way is the only way. But when you're in a melting pot like Houston, Texas, I always tell my cops, and you can actually watch my first day of cadet training on YouTube. Every time a new police class comes in, I would encourage everyone watching, go find it. Houston Police Chief Acevedo, new cadet class. You'll see what we talk about. Because you're going to see we bring up.
Oh, in your HPD cadet classes.
Yes, sir. I bring up Premier Rice. I bring up a series of events.
Good.
And I talk about my expectations as a chief from day one.
What are those expectations?
Well, let's start with treat. And the other thing is the old biblical saying that treat people the way you want to be treated.
Yeah.
That's not right. And I always tell Lord, dear Jesus, please forgive me.
So what do you mean?
If you're going to be competent, culturally competent, you're going to be aware. We need to learn about the people that we're serving so we can do our very best to serve people the way they want to be treated. Because based on religious beliefs, based on culture, based on a lot of different considerations, it's not one size fits all, right? It's kind of like if an individual's autistic, you're not going to relate to them or treat them or deal with them the same way as you would. Does that make sense to you all? So you learn about cultures, you learn about the beliefs of the people you lead, you serve, and then you do your best to treat people the way they want to be treated. The other thing that I talk to my cadets on day one is that at the end of any given critical incident, you'll see a lot of police come, oh, you got to go home. You got to go home, talking to the police officers. But I say, we got to conduct ourselves in a manner where we maximize the potential for everyone to be safe, go home, go to jail, whatever that outcome is going to be. But it's important for everyone to go home. And these are the things that I tell them on day one that I'm going to hold them accountable to. Time, the 4 things from a tactical perspective: time, distance, numbers, cover, and concealment. And I bring up these incidents across the country where we fail to utilize time, distance, numbers, cover, and concealment, and somebody ends up dead. and most frequently it's the civilian, not necessarily the officer. And so time is usually on our side. So don't go in there fat, dumb, and happy, and like a blind, like the dog chasing the rabbit, and when we were watching cartoons back in the day, with the Bugs Bunny and stuff. No, you don't blindly just chase the rabbit. You don't want be smart. Utilize time.
Right.
If you know Tamir Rice is reported to have a gun at that park bench, and on the park bench, if you remember, those officers drove right up to him.
Yep. Yelled the command out of the window and shot.
You stay back. Create distance. Keep distance. Now that when you can create distance, you're creating safety for yourself and for the individual. Okay. If you know that I had an officer in Austin that 17-year-old young man, totally naked, broad daylight. And I'm just giving you all the details because I want
sure. We appreciate the transparency.
17 years of age. Okay. Totally naked. Low crime neighborhood. When you know that somebody's totally naked in the middle of the day, standing in the middle of the street, you're dealing with somebody that's either under the influence of alcohol, under the influence of drugs, or is got a mental issue. Without a doubt, you're dealing with someone in an altered state of mind. That is not normal behavior. Well, my officer, David Joseph Jr., standing there, gets out of the car with his gun in his hand for a naked guy, 17-year-old kid, unarmed. Now, I'll call him a kid, but let's face that, 17, you're at the prime of your life. You're not fat, old, and slow like I am now. It's a kid here, but physically, it is a freaky thing to see a guy standing in the middle of the street naked. But my officer comes out with a gun in his hand.
And you say that's the wrong thing.
Okay, when you come out with your gun in hand with a naked guy, you just limited your options. If you're that scared for a naked guy in the middle of the street, I told my cops in Austin, don't get out of the car. I don't need you to get out of the car. He gets David Joseph's attention. By the way, you can Google all this. It's online, and you can see, a lot of drama came out of that because I fired the officer, and of course the union had a problem with it. He gets David Joseph's attention, and David Joseph starts running at him full speed. That's pretty freaky. But when he gets to about 8-10 feet, boom, boom, shoots him twice. Then they try to save his life and all that stuff. But you know what? That wasn't a rabid dog running at you. That was somebody's son.
Yep.
And I think I get frustrated because I know that I hold officers to a high standard, and people sometimes don't pay attention. And I remember going to 30 90-minute roll calls across the Austin PD, across the city in March of 2016. And they did a vote of no confidence, the union on me, vote of no confidence. Hey, man. So I told those cops, I said, look, man, I'm not here running for prom king. I'm not interested in being your prom king. I'm your police chief.
Right.
And this isn't Burger King. You don't get to have it your way, like it the way you like it. As long as I'm the police chief, the next guy that shoots an unarmed 17-year-old kid, totally naked, without a scratch on you, they're going to get fired too. Now, let me change the scenario a little bit. Now, had David Joseph closed the gap, they get in a fight, and they're in this hellacious fight, that may change the scenario where maybe the discharge of firearm can be objectively reasonable. But with not a scratch on you, you got a baton, you've got a taser, and God forbid, you got your fist, and your first option is to shoot and kill that kid.
Yeah. So you're saying you teach your officers using deadly force as a last resort.
The sanctity of life in this department matters, and we don't shoot people because we can. We shoot people because we absolutely have to, in self-defense or the defense of another.
So let me ask you this, Chief. Damien Jones podcast with Houston Police Department Chief Art Acevedo, having a great conversation around public safety. Continue to leave those comments below. Continue to let us know with a like or a heart or what have you, how you feel about the content in this conversation. I hope it is helpful to those who are watching. Chief, what is your protocol for releasing body camera footage in officer-involved shootings?
We wait till we go through the entire grand jury process, and part of the problem is that the grand jury process takes too long, not just here in other places. And what I keep telling prosecutors is that they use prosecutorial discretion for everything. But a lot of them, they don't want to hold the bag, right? They don't want to have to own the decisions. They want to be able to say, hey, I took it to a grand jury. But here's the problem with that. You know, there are bad outcomes out there. There are bad outcomes involved shootings. But in the world of videos and audio and everything else, rarely now is in the middle of the night with nobody around. We've got most of these things are captured where people can make assessments, right? And so I always say, why are you making the community wait 12 to 18 months to know what's going to happen? That's part of I think that's part of the outrage, part of the concern, part of the mistrust. Two, if you're taking an officer involved shooting that's, you know, I'll never forget one in Austin. A guy robs a beauty salon, shoots at the clerk, disarms the armored car guy. As my officers, 911 callers follow him, the police officers go in pursuit. It's on video. He gets out, he's shooting at the officers. They shoot back. Why are you going to wait 18 months, 12, 18 months later, they do a grand jury? You know, release all that stuff and say, hey, we don't think, you know, the officers did their job. Because what happens is when you take those to grand jury, then the people that want to tear down trust will say, they took all these to grand jury and nobody got indicted. Well, the truth is, there was a lot of them that have never gone there in the first place. Now, let me just say this. So when that process is done, we're good to go. We should release everything to the public so the public can make their own money.
So after the grand jury review, and once the once the entire case has closed and the investigation is done, okay.
Yeah, because again, this is the unintended consequence. My Black Lives Matter activist, Chaz Moore, who's from the Austin Justice Coalition, who's a Houston guy.
Yeah, I know Chaz well.
Oh, we're good friends. When I see you offline, I'm going to tell you the story when we first met.
Yeah, I bet it was interesting.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. So, but I brought him in. I said, guys, this is what could happen. We could end up, if this officer gets charged, we can end up with a change of venue. Do you really want it somewhere else? And you know what the answer was? No.
Right.
So but if we don't engage one another, I'll never forget, my city manager took away 40 hours of pay because I had the audacity after that shooting involving David Joseph to stand with Black Lives Matter in my headquarters, to stand with the Austin Justice Coalition in my headquarters, to stand with Measure Austin in my headquarters. These were predominantly African-American activists. And, you know, that incensed the union at the time. I said, you know what you don't get? They put their own street creds on the line standing with the man at police headquarters after a 17-year-old gets killed. Well, you're not going to give them credit for that?
Chief, I can hear a question right now. Given what you just said, I can hear a question right now. When will we see you stand with Black Lives Matter or activists here in the city of Houston on these tough issues?
My door is always open. Ashton, who's, you know, who we work with all the time. As a matter of fact, when he was going to do his protest the other day, I actually told him, hey, if you need something, let me know. Anytime that activists want to meet, I'm always available to meet. One of the things that this is driving me most crazy, we can't have these meetings like we want to have, man. We've got to connect with one another, and it can't just be in the bad times. It's got to be all the time. It's got to be constant engagement.
Right. Yeah. So, Chief, let's talk about kind of bail reform just a little bit here, and not a deep bail reform conversation. We'll leave that up to the legislators. But one of your points of critique has been with the local judges. And, you know, there was a historic bail reform package sent down by the courts because the courts rendered that poor people of color have been treated unfairly as it relates to the cash bail system in Harris County. Essentially, if you are poor and you don't have the money to bail yourself out, you have to stay and rot in jail, where those who have funds can go out and be with their families as they await trial. That said, a lot of conversation on one hand is saying, hey, they got it right. The bail reform system is working. On the other hand, there are critiques saying they are overcorrecting. Judges are being too progressive. Judges should not be partisan, and they ought to look at every case from a partial standpoint and do the right thing. With all of that kind of mixed together, how do you think judges are making your officer's job tougher?
Well, it's not just here. I mean, this is a national debate. First and foremost, let's up front. We supported the marijuana diversion program. We support misdemeanor bail reform. The challenge is that here and across the country, some prosecutors and a lot of judges are taking the low-level misdemeanor reform, which was really based on why are we keeping people behind bars that pose no threat, no public safety threat, just because they can't pay bail, to now, instead of doing an assessment, a real assessment on criminal history, what the person's charged with, and to make decisions to whether this person should be running the streets or not, we've crept that misdemeanor bail. There are those here and across the country that believe that no one should be held in custody pre-conviction. That's their position. I mean, you talk to local leaders here, they'll tell you that's their position.
And they say no one should be held.
No one should be held because it's people of color. Well, I believe we need bail reform in this country, across in the state, in this country, that when it comes to felonies, violent felonies, acts of violence, that we should look at the totality of what what is this person's what threat do they pose for society. There's a lot of people that were bad actors, they get arrested, charged, they've been convicted before for violent crimes, and they're going in one door out the other, not just here but across the country. We have got to have a real conversation, because here's what worries me. There's still a lot of legitimate reform that needs to get done.
The system's not perfect.
That needs to get done. And if we go, because you know what, people, hey, do not mistake kindness with weakness. I mean, I'm out there in the community. I'm out there in the middle of the night. I'm in northeast, southeast, southwest, north, south, east, west, and the community does not want to be the victims of crime. And I'm talking about poor communities of color. Don't think that there won't be a backlash to the right, and that's what worries me, because we still have people, and I'll never forget with John Whitmire. You know John? Yeah. My buddy John Whitmire. We go on patrol every New Year's Eve till about 3:34 in the morning. My first New Year's Eve here in Houston, we're on patrol. I had only been here for a month, so I had an officer drive us in the black and white, since I didn't even know how to get to the station really. And we make a stop on an African-American male, probably about 35 years of age. And by the way, I bring up race because that paints a picture. The prism will look at things, right, in terms of what the issues are. This is probably about 11:30 at night on New Year's Eve. He gets out of his car, chucks a rock of crack. He's in his work uniform, okay? But that rock, guess what? It's a felony. It's a controlled substance. So my officer's proud. He gets it. We arrest him. I go to look inside his car to inventory it for a tow, because we can't leave it there. We might come back. It might be on 4 blocks. I see a picture of this beautiful, probably 10-year-old young boy. And I'm thinking to myself, and I told John Whitman, I go, how have we made society safer by taking a guy we know he's employed because he's in his work uniform. He's got a little addiction problem, maybe, that might even be not completely out of control because he's working, taking him, putting him in jail on a holiday weekend. Now he's charged with a felony. See, that guy, first of all, I'd be in support of getting him a summons to get him to a drug court to get him some treatment. Because by arresting that guy, you know what we did? Next thing you know, he loses his job.
Right.
Now his wife gets in his face, and so he loses his head, and maybe
loses his job, car impounded, record, all those different.
And then he hits her, and now we have domestic violence.
Right.
That is what we need to be focusing on. And there's a lot of legitimate reform that needs to get done. But if we are not careful, not only we're not going to get legitimate reform done, we're going to lose some reforms that we've already gotten done.
What are your, give me one or two solutions that you think would make the cash bail system a little better?
Well, I think that for the misdemeanor bail is pretty much done. I mean, if you stay behind bars for misdemeanors, it's either drunk driving or you're a repeat offender that just keeps getting in trouble. And at some point, life's, there are consequences, right? But I think that for felonies, it should be about what the risk that is. What's the risk to public safety? And again, that guy with that rock, I want that guy to get a summons and let's get him some help or some treatment or some counseling. But the guy that's going around shooting at people, and then you look and he's got a rap sheet where he's been convicted or she's been convicted of doing that stuff. Well, that person, we need to hold them so we don't have like we're having in Houston, where we're getting people caught in the crossfire at the hands of people that should have already been in custody. The last thing I will say is the same people that believe that no one should be in jail held with pre-conviction don't want to do a thing to address the backlog at the court. Because like I debated the lawyer that sued, what's his name, that came from Washington that handled the lawsuit on misdemeanor bail. Can't remember his name now, but I debated him on
Rosenthal.
Was
it Rosenthal?
Well, that lawsuit, the misdemeanor one. But I debated him in on Laura Arnold's another podcast, Laura Arnold's podcast, and he kept talking about the presumption of innocence in the Constitution. I said, well, you know what? You also have a right to a speedy trial. What are you going to do about that? How are you helping people that have charges that they're facing and they're pending for 3, 4, 5 years, which is what's happening in Harris County? So we need to have a comprehensive look at our entire system. I think we need to have, especially when we can get back back in person, right. We should all come out, invite the public, and let's have a real robust discussion to talk about what we need to do. But in my estimation, it shouldn't be about money. It should be about the risk.
Yeah, a couple more questions. I'll let you get out of here. Damien Jones podcast with Houston Police Department Chief Art Acevedo. Chief, since you became chief, what steps have you taken to build trust and to ensure good relational policing within the department?
Well, first and foremost, I've modeled the behavior that I want my people to be involved in. I mean, I'm out. I don't meet a stranger. I'm all right because I'll talk to anybody that wants to talk. Right. I make myself available. I answer all my own emails. My email is public. It's not one of these secret emails that these chiefs have. Yeah. And I engage tirelessly. I engage critics. We engage activists. We engage everybody. I think that's important. Secondly, we have made our expectations as a police department to our workforce very, very, very clear. If you lie, you die. If you go out abusing people, you're not going to be working here anymore. And what's interesting is that we had the Harding incident where we've got 2 officers charged there. That made the news. But we've had 2 other officers and officer-involved shootings that we've charged criminally through the DA. I don't think that ever even made the news. So we had another officer that didn't use a taser appropriately. It was not objectively reasonable. He got charged. That didn't make the news. So there's a high level of accountability. And I think that one of the things that you see here is I think that the community recognized that. A lot of people in the community recognize that. I would recommend that people go to the Civil Service Commission website here in Houston, where all the disciplinary letters are published, and you'll get to see that we hold people to high standards. And the most important piece is that the majority of our officers, they hold each other to a high standard. Most of our complaints are internal. And when you have police officers, after you run somebody out and fire them, when I have a shift call me and say, thank you for getting rid of those guys, we're heading in the right direction.
Chief, is speaking of that, how do you continue to combat and build trust when there is a consistent blue code of silence within police departments, not only your department, but that's across the board with law enforcement agencies? There's what goes on stays here, and we're going to close ranks and support our guy. But how do we break the back of this blue code of silence? Because if we're going to ask folks in the community to help you guys figure out and figure out cases and snitch, if you will. We need some cops to snitch as well on those bad apples.
Well, first of all, that reporting policy violations is required of everyone in this department. Okay. But secondly, that's an interesting notion, because you see the problem in our country is that there are 18,000 police departments. Okay. Mm-hmm. Not all of them are progressive. There's good and bad and everything. But I would say that the blue code of silence, where it is today compared to where it was 20 years ago, we've come a long way. I think body cameras, warrant cameras have a part of that. I think progressive leadership has a big part of that. I would ask folks to not look at their police department through the prism of what's happening in Ferguson, through the prism of what's happening somewhere else. Let's judge each other based on our own individual actions and not through the prism of history. Secondly, let's pay close attention to what is going on in the police department. What you'll find out with us is that the vast majority of the discipline here is all internal and for misconduct involving the community, because a lot of times people don't complain, right? They don't think anything's going to happen. But when we find it, we address it. So I would say also pay close attention to the civil service website, where you see what the discipline is, because I think what people are going to find is you have a police department that's actually policing itself aggressively, and that the officers, it ain't perfect. Trust me. I call the 1%, the children of the corn, right? They hate their cats. They hate everybody. You've got to acknowledge the condition before you can actually address it. We'll never achieve perfection, but we'll never stop seeking it. But we can't do it alone. We need to do it together, and I hope that the community will keep engaging us so we can take our department to the next level.
Yeah. So you mentioned, and one thing I'll tell you, Chief, that I like about you is that you do engage. Not only do you engage your supporters, but you also engage your critics, and you stand out front and you face the music and you offer your version of transparency to the general public. So I can appreciate that you're not a leader who hides in the closet and sends your subordinates to speak for you. So I give you credit there. But what do you say, Chief, to those who say that you are Hollywood, you're chasing cameras?
Again, are you talking to Boykins?
No. I've heard that critique across the board from many. He's not the only person that may have said that. But to say that you're Hollywood, to say that you chase cameras, to say that you're chasing microphones because you want to run for office, what do you say to those people, Chief?
First of all, guilty as charged in terms of chasing the cameras. You know what? You can sit back and let the media frame your message, or you can frame it yourself. I've always chosen, if you're going to hold me accountable, I'm going to frame my own message.
Absolutely.
I'm not look at this. Sylvester Turner brought me here to run this department. And the reason I go to every officer involved shooting scene is I'm not going to rely on just a report. I want to rely on my own eyes because I want to see the evidence. I want to walk the scene. I want to look at where the casings are at. I believe that when you lead from the front, that you improve your chances of success as an organization. Two, this is a 6.7 million person region. We rely, I always tell cops, the court of public opinion matters.
Absolutely.
It matters to everything we do.
Absolutely.
Our budget, your pay, your benefits, how you're going to be trusted or treated or believed by a grand jury or another jury, how you're going to be trusted or believed by a criminal jury as you try to get justice for a victim of a crime. The court of public opinion matters. And guess what? You don't change culture in a police department via memo stating on the 16th floor of headquarters, and you don't build relationships sitting behind a desk while writing memos all day long with the community. I believe that transparency builds trust, familiarity builds trust, and the only way I can reach 6.7 million people, because we have a federal grand jury pool that goes well beyond the city of Houston, is to try to make sure people hear what I think, what I believe in on the issues, and quite frankly, I know that I anger the extreme right and the extreme left almost equally, which tells me I'm in a pretty good spot when it comes to politics. But people have been telling me I'm running for office since I got to Texas in 2007, and the only thing I'm going to run to when we're done here is to the bathroom, because I'm open and the is ready to come out.
Right, Chief. Since you've been Houston Police Chief, do you have any regrets?
Since I've been here, oh Lord, where do I start? You always have regrets. You know, I could start when we lost, Sergeant Perez, Steve Perez. I don't know if the community remembered, but that Saturday night when Harvey hit, I made the decision that night trying to get back from Greenspoint. I remember my mayor telling me Saturday morning at the Emergency Operations Center, don't let Greenspoint, they just had a flood there, and it's a community that's it's a community that is an immigrant and African American community, and so hey, if it's important to the mayor, I'm going to go check it out. So I was in that water that night for about 2 hours with our folks, rescuing folks. On my way back, I couldn't even find. I mean, it took us forever to try to get back here. That's one of my regrets is that I made everybody stay that night. I told everybody until this operation is over, nobody goes home. So when the morning shift comes in, nobody goes home. And not one Houston police officer was allowed to leave work for 6 consecutive 24-hour shifts. That's why we were able to do all the rescues and keep everybody safe. That is a huge regret because I feel like I could have done something better. The other thing I would say is that when you think about all the challenges that we do here, that we do have, I regret that I'm not making enough time to be out with the people we serve, and I think that because of this COVID, it's going to put our relationships behind because we're not having the meetings that we're used to in the town halls.
Right.
I don't know what anybody says. A town hall on a Zoom is not the personal connection, man. It's just I don't.
You need to see, you need to feel, you need to touch.
Yeah. I mean, that's just we got a lot of work ahead. The work never ends. But like I said, I love this city. I've fallen in love with this city. I know that there's some people would like to see me gone, but I've decided that I want to be around here for a long time to come. I love the place, and as the police chief or as a citizen, but I will always use my voice to stand up for the community that's being impacted most by violent crime, and that's poor communities and communities of color, and to hold people's feet to the fire. I think that's what God put me on this earth for.
Absolutely. And last thing, and I'll let you go, Chief. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We're still fighting and battling COVID. Our lives have been disrupted in a great deal. As you mentioned, we can't touch, we can't feel, we can't engage with one another. We happen to make some financial challenges. There, close proximity with family members and family violence is on the uptick. Murders are on the uptick. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear within our city, Chief. What would you say, just a quick word of encouragement to those who are just wondering what tomorrow will look like as we face COVID-19?
First of all, let's not forget that this is a really special city. When some people try to, on the extreme right, try to say that the cities are all rotting and that we're just a bunch of just liberal nuts and all sort of stuff. When you look at how this city responded during Harvey, neighbor came to the rescue of neighbor. Let's not forget that we may be battered, we may be knocked down, but we're Houston, and we really are Houston strong. And my dad, I've got a frame up here, a picture of my mom and dad with a card that they gave me when I graduated from the California Patrol Academy in 1986. He said, "He who perseveres triumphs." And Houston will persevere. We will have our ups and downs, but together we're going to come through it. And like Colin Powell said in his autobiography that his mama used to tell him, tomorrow will be a better day. Never forget that as tough as it seems today, that if you don't give up on yourself and we don't give up on each other, there'll be ups and downs, but there will be better tomorrows, and we will get there together.
Absolutely. Chief Art Acevedo, I really appreciate you joining us on the podcast. I hope that our viewers enjoyed your conversation. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you so much for all that you do, and to all your officers who continue to put your lives on the line each and every day. I understand you have a tough job and everybody doesn't see it that way, but you want to make it back home to your families just like the next person does as well. So big, huge thanks to your officers, and continue the great work. And folks, thanks for joining us. And until next time, live your life with intensity, integrity, and intelligence. This is the Damien Jones Podcast.